So we're going to talk about project management in this session. We're going to talk about core competencies for project management. I'll talk about who needs to develop those core competencies, what that consists of, and we're going to particularly concentrate on the organization as opposed to project manager as a whole. I'll talk a little bit about the project manager as well, of course, but we want to talk about organizational capability, and that's where the conversation is going these days globally in project management, is building that organizational capability, and there's reasons for that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I will also give you some ideas about how to assess your own project management capability, capacity, and where to go from here. Before we get too excited, I'd like to know who's in the room. How many of you are from government? Okay, project managers in the room? Okay, and contractors? How many of you are at the executive level and want to know how to build organizational capability for handling projects and handling projects better? Okay, so just so I know, so it's a good mix of all sorts. I didn't want to speak to one sector over another, and that's why I was asking the questions. So Leora gave me a very generous introduction. I'm not used to that. I usually just stand up and talk, so it's kind of overwhelming. But I should talk a little bit about Procept and why we feel that we can start really, our traditional business has been teaching project management courses, tools and techniques of project management. And we've been at it for 30 years. We were almost the first off the block with, I don't like the noise this thing is making, we were almost the first off the block with project management courses aligned with the project management body of knowledge. How many of you have heard of that beast? I call it because it's now this thick. A few of you, okay. Well, that's the standard for project management in the United States, well accepted in Canada as well and many other parts of the world, and it has a certification program. Oh, thank you, that's the problem. That's probably it, I didn't even think of that. So we've been at it for a while, so we're talking from a foundation of strength. I've been at it for a while, since 1995. I started teaching scheduling because once upon a time in 1995, we all thought project managers, that's what they do, is they build plans, and a plan is a schedule, and we manage to the plan, and therefore they have to understand scope and schedule, and that's it. Well, we've grown beyond that, way beyond that. With all this stuff going on, we in Procept have felt that we're never going to stop. We're never going to sit and just take this project management body of knowledge or whatever standard is the fad and just keep teaching to that. Quite frankly, that's a little bit boring after a while. We are researching as well. We're at the universities. We are, being at the universities, we do have to do our research. We participate in conferences, global conferences. We are involved in developing standards on project management. Some of you may think, standards, who cares? More regulations, is that really what we need? That's not the kind of standard I mean. I mean standards in project management, so kind of in the ISO 9000 sort of realm without the associated certification. Why is that important? Particularly important in project management, because we are probably more than any other industry. In construction, we're becoming more and more globalized. If nothing else in Canada, look around the room. Do you see, what nationalities do you see in the room? We hire people from around the world to come and work here. Wouldn't it be nice to hire people and know that they are talking the same language, using the same terminology as we are for projects, that they understand same processes as we do for project management, the same tools for project management. Similarly, when we go and work somewhere else, that we can advertise our skill set using a language that people understand. And that's why standards are important. And this is relatively recent that we are working on international standards in project management. But that's one of the main reasons, at least my reason for participating, because it's all on a volunteer basis, nobody pays me for that. But it's for setting some sort of a framework around language and processes so we have an international language to talk globally around projects. And it is a global competency. Tom Peters predicted in 1996, a book, Liberation Management, a big business book, famous business book, almost all of tomorrow's work will be done in project configurations. So we've recognized that project management is a key skill for competitiveness, for moving forward in our industry, for innovation, and for assuring our clients that we're doing things properly. But hold on a minute. How long has project management really been around? How long has project management been around?
A long time.
It's my picture, by the way. A long time. So what's changed? Why is it such, we're catching up, we're on a treadmill, we have to really know this now across all sectors. Why are we talking about organizational capability in project management as opposed to just the project manager building those planning skills and cost control skills? What's changed? You tell me, what's changed? Why are you here? What's changed in your industry? Why do you feel that project management, you must feel the same way I do, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. What's changed over the last centuries in project management? Anybody tell me? Any thoughts? Technology. Absolutely, that's been a huge influence, and the pace of change of technology. The pace of change. How long did it take to build the Cathedral of Notre Dame? Anybody know? 250 years? Okay, can we build cathedrals? I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are trying, by the way. They've got a building that they've been at for, I think, since 1990 something. Church of Scientology, sorry, not Jehovah's Witnesses, Church of Scientology, the one that Tom Cruise belongs to. Read about it, it's loads of fun. But nonetheless, it's not 350 years, it's not 250 years, right? So that's one of the things that's changed. What else has really changed? Costs. We're driven to be more competitive, more efficient with our dollars. What else? Pardon? Manpower, skill sets, the global economy. So what has that pushed on us? Well, let's go back to this type of projects that we've been doing for centuries. Project management has been around since Egyptian times. Egyptians were actually pretty good at it. They had to build these pyramids before the person for whom they were building the pyramid died. Right?
They had whips.
Well, that's a bit of a fallacy. If you go there, you'll find out. There was a period of time where they used slaves, but actually they used a lot of paid labor. Farmers, they built these things while the fields were flooding, and the farmers had nothing to do. So they put them to work, building pyramids. So most of the pyramids were built with paid labor. Now, nonetheless, you might agree that human resource management was not the top of their concern. But they still got them done within a certain set period of time, certainly faster than the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which I might say the human resource management there was not too much better than the pyramids, although they didn't have slaves. So let's look at that traditional approach. The traditional approach was, we want to design something, we want to build something. Let's hire a project manager. Okay, project manager comes on site and they're supposed to manage scope, cost, and time and achieve the objectives that we set out for them. Now, if they don't do a good job, what do we do? Traditionally? Fire them. Right? That's what we've done traditionally. And you'll hear that about some big projects over and over again. There are some in Toronto that I shall not mention because they might be politically sensitive. There are project managers that have been fired a few times, right? Does that solve the problem? Some of you have had unsuccessful or less than successful projects. Does that solve the problem for the client? No, it doesn't. We're still left with this. This is one of the most famous ones in Canada. In the annals of project management history, actually internationally, there have been books written about it. And this was a failed project, it was a failed product, although it looks very beautiful and I really like it. I go to Montreal all the time and it's a beautiful building. But what do we do with it? In fact, it's worse now because now we have to pay to maintain it. Nobody wants to tear it down because it looks so beautiful, right? And practical, but beautiful. So, yeah, it doesn't fix the problem. That traditional approach of hiring a PM with the appropriate skill set, making them responsible for the project, and then blaming them when things go wrong doesn't work. Now, most of the time we don't. Most of the time we end up with successful projects, which is a good thing. But we recognize that most organizations are reporting, on top of everything else, that projects are increasing in size and complexity. There have been studies done on this, and there's more projects all the time. They have more complex structures. This has to do with, as you mentioned, increased pace of technological change, the global economy, pressure to do more with less, increased stakeholder expectations, and the most important element isn't up there, our own competitiveness. As soon as we invent something, somebody else copies it and potentially does it to reduce costs because they haven't invested in the intellectual property of development, so they don't have the overhead, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to reinvent ourselves all the time. So that competitiveness of the global economy and our own industry drives us to recognize that we have to get involved in things that we didn't traditionally do. If you don't, you become stagnant, and I really don't think that organizations that keep doing the same things over and over again are around for the long term. You have to constantly change, you have to evolve, you have to grow, and that means project management. Because a new thing means that you have to implement it using project management. So what we've also been studying, and we haven't really got good statistics on this, we're still working on trying to get good statistics, but, and how do you measure project success, for heaven's sakes? Everybody has their own measures, and sometimes people spin that to suit their own purposes, and it goes on and on and on. But nonetheless, anecdotally, we're seeing some trends that, generally speaking, that people who have an organizational approach to project management, as opposed to just one person and putting it on that one person to build a team and so on and so forth, generally speaking, have better project management outcomes. So it means improving your own organizational competence at all the way through the organization, not just for the project manager. So what do I mean by that? By the project organization in particular. Yes, it's a project manager, but it also means that there's a project. A project manager cannot do it without a good project management team backing him up. And I specifically draw your attention to the project management team, not just the team working on the project, but the management team. And the more complex a project, the more you want to have this entity backing up the project manager. And we are also talking about the executive level. We often say a project manager should report to a sponsor, but there might be others involved. If I'm a contractor, I have my project sponsor in my own office that's in my company, but I'm also going to be talking to the client. So we have to establish that relationship as well. So we need to build organizational competencies at all levels, at the executive level, the project manager level, and at the project management team level. But what competencies? Does everybody need to learn the same things? Well, we've been trying to get executives in our courses since, I don't know, time immemorial, and none of them will sit for a 6-day or 5-day or a 3-day. It could be tough to even get them in for a 1-day course. So we recognize that it's not the same things that you build. Each level has certain things that they need to learn from project management. So some of you are project managers. So let's focus on the project manager, because it is, of course, the star player of tomorrow, as Tom Peters says. It is certainly one of the hinges to a successful project. So I'm going to talk from 2 levels here. First of all, for project managers who are interested in advancing their skills. And then I'm also going to be talking to the executive level clients here who are looking for project managers. How do you vet for the right project manager? And we often hire project managers on contract. How do we know we've hired the right person? Beyond that, how do we help them do a good job? In a resource short world, sometimes we'll have to find the less than perfect person. How do we coach them to make them better? And how do we recognize when perhaps they're running into trouble and they're afraid to tell us? So first thing that we look at is certification. And a lot of us talk about Gold Seal. How many of you are familiar with Gold Seal from Canadian Construction Association? Yeah, very well regarded certification from Canada, very well regarded in the rest of the world. US certainly eyes our certification program and is a little bit jealous. They have very comprehensive training programs, possibly even more detailed than ours are, but they don't have that same national standard beyond PMBOK, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So Gold Seal is specific to the construction industry. How many of you are interested in the qualifications for that? Anybody? One person? Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You can talk to me after the course and I can tell you. There's PMI. How many of you have heard of the PMP credential? How many of you are interested in that? 1, 2, clients. Gold Seal is very much for contractors. If you are intending to pursue that as your career, i.e. be a project manager for a contractor, that's certainly a credential that is very valuable. If, however, you want to switch over to the client side, you will find that PMP is more recognized. And some contractors are starting to get their people PMP credentialed primarily so that they can answer RFPs, bid documents that say, prove to us that you have somebody who's credentialed. We want a project manager on your team who is, it's certainly a good thing to have. If you are doing a project as a client, then look for that on your contractor side as well. What does that assure you? And some of us do complain, just because I hired a PMP, there's still, there's no assurance that they'll be a good project manager. You're absolutely right. Because at the end of the day, all of these credentials deal with basically a couple of things. I'll talk about Prince 2 in a few minutes. They deal with a project manager's competency against some sort of a standard. Are they valuable? Yes, they still are valuable because at least you know that the person should, if they pass that credential, and you can go and check, by the way, on these various websites, you can enter their certification number and they'll tell you whether that they're telling you the truth or not on their resume. All of these assessments check for a couple of things. To apply to write the test, you have to have a certain level of experience, and that level of experience should be attested to by somebody, some sort of past peer or a manager or something. They don't always audit though, so people have slipped through with, I won't get nasty, but they have slipped through. They don't audit everybody, they don't have the time to audit everybody. But the second thing is they have to write a paper test. So the main thing that these credentials do is they tell you as an employer that the person at least should be able to speak the language, should know the difference between a schedule and a scope statement, for example, and they should be able to benchmark a project against some standard or another in terms of process. So when something is going wrong, they should be able to identify, at least from a process standpoint, what could potentially be solutions. And that's really what all these tests do. They take a project manager's knowledge and you are supposed to put it in the context of some sort of a standard, whether it's the PMBOK. Gold Seal doesn't have a standard, but it's aligned with PMBOK, so we did that on purpose, actually. It's specific to the construction industry, but it's PMBOK in that context, with construction language as opposed to PMBOK language. IPMA has levels of credentialing. It's done through peer assessments. It's very, very thorough. It's an international credential. So if you're hiring people with those credentials, the D is the lowest from what I always get the letters mixed up, and A is the highest. It might be vice versa. I'm terrible with these things. But you'll be assured that they are at a certain level there. So it's a much more thorough examination. Prince 2 is particularly for government environments. That's why I was asking. It comes from England. It's a specific methodology for handling projects in a government environment. Very strong on governance. And then there's other international standards, frameworks, international credentials, and so on. GAPS, if you're from an owner organization and you want to assess your skills, I want to move, and they told me I can't leave this microphone, which is driving me nuts. It's actually free. It's available online. It's an organization of people who are absolutely passionate about this profession. I'm not part of them, but some professors and some really amazing consultants are part of that group. And they came up with this competency assessment that's free online to anybody who wants to assess their competency in their organization and their own competency as a project manager. Now, the only detraction is, again, it's not construction oriented. It's really broad business-based oriented. So you might want to watch for that. There might be some rather generic statements in there that for you might be, you say, well, that's nice that they're assessing that, but that has no value for me or in my industry. So you might want to watch for that. Nonetheless, it's there for you to use. So the first thing to look for when you're hiring a PM, are they credentialed? Do they have a credential? And I would say if they have one or another, all of them are good. I do not favor any one over the other, because that will at least give you a baseline to stand from. And same thing for those of you who are interested, I think it's a really good thing to try and go for one of these credentials. And PMI, PMP is the most popular one. But, of course, it goes beyond that. So, the next thing we want to look for is all of these competency frameworks talk about 4 things in a project manager. Leadership, knowledge of the technology, for us it's construction, knowledge of project management processes that they test for with these credentials, and knowledge of the business environment in which you work. The standards, the tests, cannot possibly test for leadership, technology, or business environment. They can't test for that. Gold Seal tries to check for this as much as they can, but even so, Gold Seal is generic to all construction industry, client as well as contractor side. So you can't get too specific. It still talks mostly about process in construction language, right? So how do you check for that? So when I ask clients, and I go into client organizations and I ask them, what do you desire from a project manager? And they'll give me 2 pages of qualifications. We want them to be good communicators. We want them to be team players, team builders, team motivators. Can you think of some? What do you want your project manager to be? What do you think are the most important skill sets for a project manager? Enough me talking, you tell me. What do you think are the 3 most important skills? What 3 things pop into your mind when I say you're looking for a project manager? What would you look for?
Punctual.
Pardon?
Punctual.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Punctual.
Punctual. Oh, on time, yes. So if they arrive late for the interview, you've already got a problem, right?
Organized.
Organized. What else pops into your mind? Leadership. Well, what does leadership mean? I hear that a lot. What the heck does leadership mean? 'Cause I bet you it has different meanings in different industries and different environments. Take responsibility, absolutely. What else do you want to see from a project manager? Confidence. Knowledge. Knowledge of what? So some technical knowledge. Do they have to be experts in building bridges, for example? Ah. They have to be a team player. So have a team member. Understand the workings of teams. Yeah, I'm glad that you say they don't have to be an expert in bridge building. You would not believe how many advertisements I see that say they have to have had 10 years experience in bridge building or elevator construction. That's the industry I'm from, by the way, is elevator construction. Yeah, and gosh, it brings to mind a conference I attended. I attended a panel at PMI, and there was like 6 people on the panel, and there were all these managers, executives from these major companies. NASA was one of them, Department of Energy in the States was another, IBM, I can't remember the other 6. And they had a whole conversation about what are the important skills to look for in a project manager. And a lot of it was about leadership, communication, team building, just like you said, right? And anyway, so I said, okay, so here I am as a facilitator, consultant, trainer. I build curriculums for companies. I build development programs for project managers and team members for companies. That's not me. Mine's turned off. You know, I remember, I said, okay, so as a facilitator, how do I prepare project managers for this? What do you want from us as instructors, consultants, facilitators to help you find the right people? So I said, you know, what should I concentrate on? What is the first thing you look for, I asked them, in an interview when you hire project managers? I can't tell you how disappointed I was in the answer. The NASA guy stood up and said, I want them to know Primavera. You just spent 45 minutes talking about leadership and communication, and you're checking for Primavera? You can go to school and learn that from a book, for heaven's sakes. Right? So, and then the other guy sat there, and there was one lady, I didn't hear from her, but the other 2 guys were sitting there, yeah, that's right, that's what we look for. So here I am teaching people to be leaders and team players and communicators and know process, and you're interested that they know Primavera. I mean, I can teach Primavera too, but, you know, hey, is that really a mark of a good project manager, that they know Primavera? Seriously? Anyways, think about that when you're advertising for a project manager. So I asked for this list, and I get 2 pages, right? it's a tall order. Project manager is a person who wears many, many hats and has to be almost a chameleon, switching one hat for another and understanding what skill sets have to be used in what environment and for what type of project. But recognize that we're not perfect human beings. I like to think we are, but we're not. Far from it. We all have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. And so when we look at this spectrum of skill sets we want from a project manager, we really should understand our environment well enough to know which one of these are the most important. Primavera is important if you're going for project controls people. Absolutely. But if you're a project manager, you want different skills. And you need to be able to prioritize for that. So for example, for a large, complex project, you want to see those strong leadership skills and be able to know when to be autocratic and when to be more democratic, and when to seek consensus and when to make a decision, as opposed to knowing the process or knowing the technology. Because large, complex projects, you probably have people for that. You can probably hire a scheduler, a cost controller, and so on and so forth. You have to know just enough to be able to understand what the issues are, to be able to detect problems, solve problems, help people solve problems, right? And it is more important that that particular project manager understands the business environment in which you work. So if I'm building a hospital, I have to understand how government projects work. More than knowing the technology or knowing the process. For a small technical project, it might be the other way around. If you're doing my elevator projects, I was hired because I had experience in elevators. I knew about the process of not necessarily building them, but I knew about consultants and clients, and I was in consulting for a while, kind of helping out. I always find that funny. You come straight out of school and you become a consultant. I mean, seriously, I have no experience, but I was writing specifications, checking drawings, that sort of stuff, right? And then I went to work for an elevator contractor, and they hired me because I did know the technology. Now, as I got more advanced in the project management field, that piece of knowing the technology started backing off because, again, I had a site supervisor, I had technicians, they were responsible for building it. In fact, if I knew it too well, I'd be tempted to take over. That's not my job. My job was to manage the process to ensure we made a profit on our projects. That's why I was hired. And thank goodness for my manager who hired me. He made that very clear to me on the very first day. Your job is, he said, to develop a process for our elevator projects so that we can make money. I'll manage the business environment because I'm the sales guy. That's what I do. Okay, you stay right out of that. And our team works really well, so you don't have to be super autocratic, but you do have to sometimes be autocratic with the client if you see that they're violating the contract. Well, I can do that. So, knowing that really helps. Knowing what the balance is for you. Something has to take priorities. And there are various models out there. And as I mentioned with project controls, certainly, yeah, go for it. Primavera, Microsoft Project, financial control tools, and so on and so forth. And perhaps they don't need to have leadership skill. They're the type of person who likes to sit behind a computer and they like to produce reports. Great. But they're not project managers. Those are project controls people. Let's take a look at a couple of successful projects. This is one of my favorite. Golden Gate Bridge. Does everybody know the story behind the Golden Gate Bridge? And I hope my hyperlink works. This is a really neat clip that I found on YouTube. And that, I hope that it worked before. Did everybody hear that, by the way? Yeah, it seemed to be okay. So, it's a successful project. By the way, Strauss was not really a very nice guy. I don't know if you know that. So when we think about a team builder, and, sorry, I'm just trying to get back here on the, there we go, on the thing, this wonderful beast. When we think about a team builder, we think of somebody who knows how to talk to people and doesn't get people upset, especially in the Canadian sort of culture. We agree that project management is 90% behavioral skills. Do you think Strauss succeeded in building sort of a team approach to the project? What do you think? Oh, he did, very much so. And it's funny, in construction, it's not about being nice to each other, it's about being focused on the same goal. What do you think he did to make people feel confident in the project enough to accelerate the schedule so that that bridge that was considered an impossible project, by the way, at the time, was completed ahead of schedule and under budget in a depression where people wanted to stay employed. How did he do that? That's right. He focused on safety, and that's what people say, whether it was really out of concern or whether it was from an economic standpoint. He probably did do the cost-benefit analysis and said, listen, I mean, $130,000 in 30-something, I mean, that's millions today. But it saved millions in the long run because people worked faster. They were confident. It built morale, jumping into the net, right? Being saved, you know, it's like building trust in the team. And that's what he did by this simple, and it was visible. It wasn't just something that he was going around patting people on the back. Everybody saw this net, and it was visible. And it was sending a signal to every single person there saying, I value your work enough that I'm going to invest in this very visible symbol that's going to cost a lot of money. It's not just about the safety belts. It's not just about the hard hats. But I'm personally going to put project budget to the safety element. And amazing how that safety element ended up paying off on the bottom line and paying off because people felt they were part of the same team, that it became a unifying objective. That's how you build good projects. On the other hand, I remember a project that I was involved with, and I'll show you a picture in a few minutes, where the project manager definitely didn't do a heck of a lot of that. But one of the things they did do, and I think one of the unifying forces, when we talk about team building in construction, I think one of the things that really helps in construction is if we have a team that has a common focus. That's how we build a team in construction. Some sort of common, visible focus. And it has to be visible. It can't just be words. Because of the people that we work with, the people out in the field, the people who are doing the actual physical work, they believe in tangible things. So we have to show them tangibly that we mean what we say. And a project, this Hibernia project, I was involved with 2 project managers. And the first project manager they were from France and they were doing the design part of the project. And I wouldn't say it was they weren't overly concerned about time and cost, let's put it that way. In fact, some of you who are the same vintage as me may recall that it started back in the 80s and it crept along at a snail's pace for about 15 years and people thought it would never work and it's never going to be built and so on and so forth. Well, the construction team that came in under the leadership of Kverner out in Norwegian company cleaned house, and their project manager was very strong on process. And so he went back to first principles, and he made everybody on that team go back to first principles. And built, the first thing they did, from what I know, and everybody I've talked to was involved in that project after the fact and so on, one of the first things that they at least let out for public consumption, for us contractors on the site, was a work breakdown structure. And to all of us who worked on that project, we saw visibly, whether that was really the key to success, I don't know, but that's what it felt like to us, that they were managing everything through that WBS. They were managing our work, they were managing their work, and they meant what they said. That doesn't mean they didn't beat us up on occasion, and they didn't try to get us to do things for free, and the usual contractual construction type of stuff that you run into, but it does mean that progress was visibly measured against something we could recognize. And there was no touchy-feely stuff there. And there were times in the project that we were all scratching our head going, oh my gosh, not again. Seriously. They're calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why? But at the end of the day, this is what we got. And as it got closer and closer, that WBS was very focused on this physical build. And because it was very focused on that physical build, people recognized words in it: elevators, towers, piers, tank, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a model of what we were actually building. that we could then communicate to our people as well. And as we checked off progress, and we could actually see it out there, I didn't go out very often, but my site supervisor did, my electricians did, and they could see that what was being built was matching what was on paper. That was exciting. And that schedule was actually being met. That was exciting. So two different kinds of project managers. One very focused on the common objective and finding something that everybody can kind of build around as a team, and another not caring about that at all, but caring about the product and making sure all the processes that were being used were supporting the product. And not I'm sure there were, but they were never visible to us, some sort of management processes that customers wanted or whatever. They were focused on this. And when that thing got towed out to sea, in September, I think it was 1997, it was a phenomenal sight. And we were all excited, and excited to be part of that project. And that was, again, a project that didn't really beat schedule from the beginning, but that certainly construction process beat the schedule. When it started in April of 1996, I believe, I may have that exaggerated, I can't remember dates all that clearly, but we all thought there were 4 piers sticking out of the water, that was it. And then it all came together like a big, huge Connects Lego set. And it was phenomenal to see that. It broke some sort of record in terms of production, because the whole thought process was that it would get built in harbor, towed out to sea, put in place, and full production as soon as possible. And I think it went to full production in 3 weeks. That I do remember. I was not working for the elevator company anymore. I was working for CSA, and my site supervisor gave me a call when they towed it out to sea. You should see this thing! And then he called me again 3 weeks later. They went into full production. 3 weeks, right? No spills, right? Hugely successful project. One managed through people management skills and recognizing what was important to the people out in the field, and the other managed through process. So that's what you want to see in a project manager, that they can identify what's important to that team and help them focus on that goal. And now, they can't do it alone. And we look for that in a project manager, but recognize that if the rest of the project management team and the client and upper management is working against them, you can hire the best project manager in the world. It's not going to help you. So back to this idea of not just building skills with the project manager, but also with the whole organization. And again, we're starting to get statistics on maturity and success level. Okay? Percentage of on time, percentage on budget versus those who don't. Various studies show anywhere from 10, 15 to 25% variance range between those who have a project management capability that they are building versus those who are ignoring it completely and just hoping that it'll be somehow happen with the right people that they hire. So back to this, we talked about the project manager. Let's talk for a few minutes about the project management team, a very key part of this process. We talk about subject matter experts. We talk about perhaps assistance with project management process people, people who know cost management, schedule management, maybe even communications people. I'm not a great communicator. I really am not. I like to focus on the work, and I don't, going out and talking to my client just to say hi. I don't like talking to people unless I have something to say. Typical engineer, what can I do? If I have something to say, I'll gladly come and talk to you. But if I have nothing to information or a question I have to ask you, then I figure you're busy, my busy. Why do I have to waste your time? But if you don't do that, you miss out on building a relationship. So communications is important. I personally, because that's a weak point for me, I'd like to have somebody on my team who has that skill set, who can remind me when I need to do that, right? Who can sometimes do it for me, because I'd much rather be focused on doing the work, right? So it's good to have people in your team who understand the project management process as well as you do. They don't have to take responsibility or accountability for it, but for them to understand the process so they can act as my conscience when I'm tempted to take shortcuts, when I'm tempted to do things sort of in a different way. So we build a project management team. We often build it focusing on technical competencies. That might be a bit of a miss. Make sure a well-rounded team, especially for a complex project, with lots of layers, you have some people who also know the PM process. A lot of my clients are having project managers and team members take the same courses so that they can have a conversation about their projects in the class. Have an honest conversation, because I always tell them what we talk about in this room doesn't leave this room. You can have that honest conversation here about what you need to do to work better together. Not maybe the really intense courses for certification and so on, but the fundamental courses that introduce process, introduce tools, and so on, especially for in-house. Of course, we might have experts who are, in our industry in particular, want to have somebody who's an expert in safety management, again, acting as my conscience. We do that with safety. We don't leave it up to the project manager. We hire somebody who is often the site supervisor, or there may be a special person dedicated to health and safety. So if we do that for safety, why do we not do that for projects as well? Have a person there who understands as much about the PM process as we do, so they can be our right-hand guidance, conscience person. Same thing, I mentioned communications, quality. So we look at that spectrum of skills. By the way, this comes from the PMBOK. These are the essential knowledge areas PMBOK says a project manager should have. And again, it's a tall order if you blow out the skill set that's required for each one of these. So I want to make sure that in my team, I have all of this, one way or another. Some of that is with me. I'm pretty good at risk and schedule and cost management and scope management. I'm not so good at communications, human resources. I'm not an expert in safety management. I'm not an expert in quality management. So I'd want to have those skill sets in my team. More than just a whole bunch of techie people that'll tell me how to build it. I'll have a design team, but that'll be separate. I'll have a design team separate from my overall project team. If I might even have a user representative on there, somebody who's going to use my product, so they can tell me if I've got some strange ideas in my head about how this project is going to go together and what it's going to be used for. So when it comes to high-performing teams that support the project manager, you want to make sure that there is a team where there's open communication. As much as both of these projects had different focuses, I would say the communication was very open. Hibernia might maybe a little bit more open than I was comfortable with, quite frankly. There was no filters at any time, but we were focused on schedule and getting this thing done. Something had to go, and being very nice to each other was the thing that went, but we didn't care at the end. It didn't matter. It really didn't matter. Open communication. Understand risk management with your team. So, and be a little, sometimes risk tolerant, we say. Risk aggressive is a little bit dangerous, but a bit of risk tolerance is good. I don't mean in terms of safety, but I mean in terms of schedule, doing things sometimes in parallel, or perhaps taking a risk and having a face-to-face with a client. A little bit of risky nature is good, because that builds creativity. Ideas come out of that. Conflict management. Having a bit of fun, having that tribalism. You saw that with the Golden Gate Bridge, that there's this tribalism that was established because of the safety net. And as I mentioned earlier, trust is so key. We understand that when we have more trust, it results in better relationships, and overall, it can pay off on that bottom line. It can really pay off on the bottom line. So speaking of trust, I left the best to last. The executive level. We haven't been paying as much attention to the executive level as we really should be in terms of project management. And that means on the client side as well as the contractor side. At a certain point, you guys also form a team. A team that is providing leadership to the project manager, leadership and direction. So we've been starting that conversation over the last couple of years. You got to recognize that projects take place in a project environment, and what we can do as project managers, especially in construction, because we work in these projectized team in the sense that often we work on one project at a time, maybe two, but we tend to be away from the office, and very quickly we start thinking that our project is the most important thing that's happening in the world. And if you're an environment where you're managing more than one project at a time, you kind of lose track of the business as a project manager, of what's going on with the rest of the business. So somebody's got to make that link for you on occasion, especially if you're running multiple projects with multiple project managers, and there are priorities that have to be set. And sometimes, I hate to tell you, young lady, but your project is not the most important thing we're doing right now. Right? We have some urgent things to take care of, and you have to solve your own problems. Or there's a certain business strategy, or the cost of money, borrowing money has changed, or the exchange rate has changed. So equipment that we're importing is now either cheaper or more expensive. A good project manager will keep an eye on that, but at a certain point, how many balls in the air can we juggle? So we need the executive level to feed that to us. And there are changes in the environment which we're doing projects, political changes, regulatory changes. So that's one of the things we're looking to the executive level for, and the client executive level. You have to keep us apprised of that. And the other thing, and this is the most important element, I saved the best to last, governance. So we talk about corporate governance. We talk about business strategy. Governance is now being talked of as something a little bit different for projects. A lot of people think governance, the system of how a business runs, counts for its money, is accountable to its shareholders, its clients, and so on and so forth, is already set. We have strategies for that. We have systems for that. So it should just apply to projects, right? Why doesn't the same system, some of you I'm sure have felt that, why doesn't the same system for governing an organization not apply to projects? What's the challenge there? What's the challenge? Why can't we just cookie cutter it? Bring it over to projects? Any thoughts? Oh.
Different requirements.
Different requirements? Like what?
The financial side and the quality control side don't have the same language.
There's number one. Absolutely. Finance in particular. The way we report money in projects is quite different than the way we report money in our regular business routine. There's our first point of clash. And then there's risk. The way we look at risk is different. And there's quite a list. So that's what we've been working on lately. We've been working on a global standard for governance from ISO, 2017. Nothing happens ever quickly in ISO. So 2017 early, we hope. Keep your fingers crossed. And it's just going to set out a framework. And just to get the attention of everybody and say, look, do you recognize that governance of projects is different than governance of the business? But you do have to link the two. You can't just completely leave them isolated. And that's what sometimes happens with organizations. They take that and they say, well, that's a project, so that's different. We'll put that over on its island over there and let them do their thing. What's the danger of that? Who can tell me what the danger is of that? See, if I was walking around, you'd all be talking to me. What's the danger of saying, that's them over there? Let them manage their own island. They could expose you to needless risk, right? And you hear about these projects. I remember INCO many, many years ago had projects on, there's a project on an island. And that's almost, I think of that literally. And I remember it got public attention because it didn't go so well. And that's almost a philosophy that they had was, you know, that's them over there. And that's an isolated project. It's pretty big, so put somebody in charge of it. And yeah, they'll come up with their own governance structure. That's very dangerous. So what we're looking at the executive level for is to create that framework that aligns, shows us how projects are aligned with our regular business. I can't do that as a project manager because I don't know the regular business very well. I know kinda, but I'm coming at it bottom up, especially if I'm hired on contract. It's the executive level that has to take that responsibility of feeding that top level down to the project manager. So when we talk about that, some of the key elements of that are understanding what a project management plan is and the need for planning and how much planning is enough. It's not that you need to know how to build a plan, but we'd really like you to know what should be required in planning. And it varies from project to project, of course. To be able to negotiate deadlines Understand what goes into developing a project schedule and why that initial target of having Union Station ready for the Pan Am Parapan Games cannot possibly compute. Right? And we knew that 3 years ago. I'm not saying the Union Station people knew that, or City of Toronto, or anybody else. I'm just saying as outsiders, because I have no inside knowledge of that project, I don't work there, just, watching its progress and watching what wanted to be achieved. When it first started, within the first couple of months, I was looking at it, and quite a few of us would go, I don't think so. That's a tall order, right? So having that ability at the executive level, when a project manager comes to you and says either, A, everything's good, of recognizing that no, everything's not good, or B, when a project manager comes to you and says, this is rather an aggressive schedule and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to reach it with the tools that you've given me, to be able to have that conversation and not simply say, you got 3 years, fix it. I'm not sure that that's what they said, by the way. I'm not saying that at all. But that's what we've got to be able to do. To be able to negotiate the deadline, to understand what goes into developing a good, realistic schedule, good, realistic budget, and yes, set aggressive targets, but understand what's realistic and what isn't. Resist changes and interference. We're looking at the executive level to act as buffers to our projects. And when all sorts of people, especially in government, come to you and say, we want to change this, want to change that, and so on, as the executive, have the ability to recognize what changes add value and what changes don't, and be able to talk to the project manager about these things. Give us guidance, not simply let everything pass through you like a transparent film, and let the project manager make that decision. Because we don't always have the authority to push back, right? So we're looking at that from you. And finally, set metrics and reward proper project team behavior. Set metrics for project performance. This is our goal for this year. I remember when one of my clients did that, and after a few years of managing projects, they actually could say 90% of our projects are coming within 10% of their original targets as identified in the project charter. That's pretty good. Now, that doesn't mean that their projects were coming in at lower cost or anything, but it does mean that they were being more consistent in what they were achieving. These were big projects, they weren't little ones. They were being more consistent in what they were achieving, and they were keeping their promises. That's what it means. That means they were creating more realistic schedules. They were creating more realistic budgets. They weren't all coming in under schedule and under budget, and then I'd wonder if you were setting comfortable schedules and budgets. But they were coming in 90% or maybe, 90% within 10%, which is pretty good, right? And then you can start improving on that. Then you can start looking at ways, given that we're coming in here, what can we do to be even better? I.e., what can we do to reduce our costs on projects, our overhead on projects, and so on and so forth. You can't do that without metrics. So where do we start? And this is where ProSet and organizations such as ours, well, salespeople hate to hear this, but anyways, come in. We introduce project management into organizations through a whole different slew of tools. Some of this you can do yourselves. The first step is we want to see that senior management is visibly committed to the process. The second is that your resource managers, your functional managers, your department managers, division managers, understand at least at high level what we're trying to achieve, and they buy into it. That's sometimes the hardest part, actually, because we are kind of rocking the boat sometimes, especially in government organizations where people have their hierarchy and have their silos, right? And now we're going to start rocking that boat a little bit because that's what projects are all about. Select methodologies, guidelines, tools, metrics. Some of the organizations create project offices. I remember one organization I went into didn't have a project management office. They had an environmental office. They had all sorts of other stuff. It's a government organization. Well, something like 60% of the overall federal funding for this particular environment, for this particular ministry, was for projects. But they didn't have a project management office. They didn't have anybody managing projects and making sure the money was being managed wisely and reporting on that on a regular basis. We just scratched our head and said, what? When 60% of your budget is devoted to projects, how can you possibly not have some oversight of that? Right? So they created a project management office. It's not a huge effort. You don't need like 10 people with secretaries and all this other stuff. Sorry, administrative assistants, old school. You need one person maybe. Maybe that's all you need is one person. And that one person owns the oversight process, owns things like the historical database for projects, has a discussion with the executive level about setting metrics for projects and what are our goals for this year. What else do we need? That one person may be the owner of whatever templates, training components you might have, right? They have the knowledge base of your project. In some small organizations, this person is like part-time. It's not even a full-time position. Right? It might be a senior project manager who also does this 50% of the time. One project at a time and this. Helps and coaches other project managers and project management teams. Whatever you like. But if a good portion of your business is projects, it's good to have at least one person who understands your business, understands your process well enough that they can help you get more competitive in this area. Think about developing a plan to improve your project management capability. We call it a three-legged stool, and the first place we go is executive support. And how do we visibly show that executive support? We might suggest, especially for government, and by the way, more and more government institutions are doing this, creating project management policies, which are really important documents. Take a look online, you'll see a whole bunch of examples. Some of them are really strong and some of them a little bit less so, but nonetheless, they send very important messages. That's the document that the executive level uses to guide their actions in project management. Governance, that sort of bizarre word. Yeah, and every organization is going to be different, but setting up those governance guidelines. Training, of course, I mean, we're in that business, so of course we're going to advertise that. Leora has all sorts of other stuff if you want to look at it and some of the offerings we have. Training is key. I don't want to downplay it. Make sure you get the right training, and not just from us, there are other people out there, but make sure it's the right training. It's nice to get people who understand the construction industry, can talk about the application of this to the construction industry, which is our strength. And of course, it's also good to start thinking about those metrics and processes and how are you going to measure that this, and too many organizations don't do this. I kind of boggles my mind that they spend all this money and effort sending people to these classes, getting them certified, and then they don't measure whether or not their projects are working any better. I sit there and go, I want to know. I'd love to know that because of all the training and facilitation and consulting that we did, that now this organization has improved their project management outcomes by X. A lot of organizations don't do this, and I don't understand why. I would look at a project management office as that's one of their key things that they should be doing, is collecting that data, deciding what is the metric that decides whether or not a project is successful, and then feeding that back and measuring that. What initiative did we do this year? We train everybody. Did we bring in, a couple of my clients now have created curriculums for developing project managers, which isn't just training, it's coaching, it's inside mentoring, and so on and so forth. And some of them are very light, it's only a little packet of stuff, and others is quite comprehensive, depends on the size of the organization. And it's doing that gap analysis, again, something that we can do, and deciding where do we need to improve. And then measuring whether the investment was worth it, for heaven's sakes, why wouldn't you do that? Right? So, introducing PM into an organization. Yes, training is a key part, but let's go beyond that. Let's select leaders in this process. Let's select some people internally who are interested and who are going to be driving that continual improvement. And make sure that we're investing our training and our consulting dollars in the right places. Let's select people to be project sponsors. So project managers have the support, have the link to the broader organization. The project sponsors that protect the organization from perhaps undue risk. Emphasize the team approach. It can take a lot of different formats. Anything from setting a very strong goal and driving towards that goal, to setting some sort of a team approach, to setting behaviors, guidelines. I said it doesn't always have to be about being nice to each other, right? There are various ways that a team approach can be achieved, especially in our industry. Start recording your lessons learned. How many of you keep good archives of your past projects and refer to them? I did. Only a few. Oh gosh. See, the elevator industry is really good for that. That was one of the best ways I learned, because I said, where do I learn about your projects? They said, go to our room over there. It's called Wonderland. Every single project they'd ever done was fully documented. Why? Liabilities, of course. But what a great repository of learning, right? So that needs to be done on a regular basis. How it's done, whether it's through archiving project files, whether it's through having lunch and learns on projects, whether it's through having a SharePoint database that people can access easily, whether it's just having 3 lessons learned on one organization, I really like this. One of my clients, they didn't even realize they were doing this, but they were creating a little picture, a little plaque on some of the more challenging or big projects. Sometimes it wasn't about size, sometimes it was because of the challenge. And they had this little plaque on their wall along their hall, picture of the project, original budget, how it performed, how the team did, and it was like a PowerPoint slide. I said, you realize that that's your project file and it's a summary and there are lessons learned in there. Really? They said. We just do that to advertise and feel good. And I said, but it's a simple 1-pager on a project, and the picture speaks 1,000 words, because you can read about the description. When you see the picture, you remember, yes, that was that auditorium that we did. I remember that, right? Oh, and I see, we could have done better on this. I'll remember that, make sure I don't make the same mistake. Great way to capture lessons learned, very visual, again, and easy to access. Have it on walls. Oh, you could have it in a PowerPoint database, whatever you like. But think about that, because we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. I could tell you some horror stories, but I won't go there. Okay, so last words, and then you can ask questions. You could have interrupted me at any time, but anyways. Developing organizational project management competencies is a key to being competitive in our global economy nowadays. Absolutely key. And it's a key to being innovative and doing more with less and being focused. And what I suggest to many project managers as well as organizations, especially if you've been around for a while, it's time to start thinking about assessing where we're at and figuring out a plan for getting better. And that's how we're going to remain competitive in this global economy. If you're interested, we also have an assessment tool. It's online. You can go to that web link and you can download it if you want. I actually have a sample here, but I didn't have time to make copies. We've been using it for over 10 years to conduct project audits and audits of project environments. We typically use it when we're called in, and we're called in when a project is in trouble or an environment is in trouble. And of course, there's our advertising material. Any questions, comments, thoughts? I'm much more a facilitator than I am a speaker, so I didn't like this tied to the podium thing, but what can you do? Yes? This one? Project manager in the middle. Okay, you tell me when to stop. Okay, yes. Oh, I'm just saying it could be anybody, right? If you're doing a big project, for example, sometimes it's an architect and a project manager, depending what level they're at, may need some help. The architect may be talking to the client more. I'm thinking about Royal Ontario Museum, for example, Liebeskind. As a project manager, Liebeskind would have thought that he was dictating to me as opposed to vice versa. So I would put Liebeskind on that level with the project sponsor and my project sponsor for my company and the client. I don't know how they arranged it because I'm not privy to that project, but I'm just suggesting if it was me, that's what I would have done. I would have put that architect as a group at that executive level. That means that I would report to all 3 of them as a unit. But my sponsor, my manager, would be the person that I'd prefer to lead that unit, because I don't have time for politics. I have to get this thing done. Yes, comment from there. Somebody had their hand up over here? I can't walk around with this microphone. Somebody had their hand up over here. No? Okay, anybody else? Yes?
Who's responsible for the PM process? Is it the project manager or the executive?
Isn't that a wonderful question? It's hard to say one person. What we've decided, what we did with ISO is we came together as global experts we've been studying the industry for a number of years, some academics, I'm probably one of the more junior ones, couldn't get anybody else from Canada to volunteer. And it's been really enlightening for me because when we compare notes, this idea of somebody owning the PM process, this is what we discussed in the governance standard. At a tactical level, application of that process has to be the project manager's responsibility. But to ensure the process is being applied correctly, that oversight is part of governance. And that the correct process is being used, because there's lots of permutations, is part of governance. Right? So for example, hospital projects, that's where we struggle sometimes a lot in hospital projects. You have a hospital board, we want to do, I don't know, I call it a renovation, but let's say they want to rebuild the surgical wing. So that means gutting it and putting new equipment and so on and so forth. So I'm going to put a project manager in charge. It's not a huge project. I'm going to select somebody from hospital administrative staff to manage it. In some cases, I've even heard that a head nurse was told, you, because it's a new nurses station, you're in charge of this project. Yeah, she's frowning. That's a challenge because these people have not been trained in project management, right? So it is the person who assigned that person as a project manager to have that oversight of that, let's say, nurse, head nurse, who has some administrative capabilities to make sure that she has the tools necessary to be able to do that job. So that means if all of a sudden you've put her in charge of I'm being sexist here, him, could be a he, if you've put him in charge of a $500,000 rebuild of the nurses station, let's send them to at least a fundamental project management course so they know what they need to tell the contractor. That's your responsibility at the executive level, to make sure that they have the right skills, the right tools, and they understand the project management process enough to be able to give direction to the vendor that they hire. Otherwise, you end up with Mike Holmes, like a lot of the clients on Mr. Holmes' show, right? But very, very good question. Any other questions, comments? How are we doing on time? We have 5 more minutes. Love to have a discussion about this. I wanted to get a panel going. I'm really going to try and suggest that for next year because I think that's even more interesting is when you have a panel of people who have had experience and various perspectives and have a discussion. What do you think? It might be rather useful. Anyways, I noticed they're starting to do panels, so I think that might be something I'm going to encourage next year. Yes?
This is, what I got from this is like from mega projects. You have a concept that chunks it down to a contractor level. I know a lot of small renovators in Ottawa who could improve their bottom lines or improve their efficiency and everything. So do you have this on a chunk down version?
What do you mean a chunk down version? Do you have like, it's called a work breakdown structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we develop with companies as well. We come in and help them build these kinds of templates. And absolutely, again, that's something, it's easy. It's one of the easiest tools to learn. You learn it in a training course. We use a construction project as an example, kitchen renovation, for example, in these fundamental courses. For the more comprehensive courses, I actually do use Hibernia because I had personal experience with that. I know what it looked like. Not all the details. They use a particular system for that based on the shipbuilding system. That's how Norwegian shipbuilding has stayed competitive, incidentally, is through their project management process. It's phenomenal. So yes, we do. And I, home renovators, it helps both the client and you, these type of scoping tools. And even for the simplest project, just something like this can improve your bottom line phenomenally for even small contractors. Come talk to me after.